I'm Michael Ferguson, and I'm so excited to talk with you today about bridges between neurospirituality and nature connectedness. I'm an instructor in neurology at Harvard Medical School, and I also direct neurospirituality research. As well, I have a fun opportunity to direct wellness programs for students at Harvard College, which is a great experience, and that I'm able to take some of the scientific insights and translate them into programming that benefits students directly. Some central questions I want to get out of the way up front are: what is spirituality and why does it matter? Spirituality is at the heart of religion. And I think about it in terms of analogy by the ways in which beauty is at the heart of art and truth is at the heart of science. Religion was a key innovation in human evolution, and it continues to be a key factor shaping geopolitics today and for the foreseeable future. In other words, even if you don't personally care about spirituality and religion, a lot of people do. And so, why not study it scientifically? I've been fortunate to have faculty positions both at Harvard Medical School as well as at Harvard Divinity School. What that means is I've had terrific colleagues who have expertise in both of these domains of human experience, of medicine as well as spirituality. And that's helped me to craft a paradigm where we're studying human spirituality using the neuroscientific tools and methods that are available to us today. Some of my early work used classic functional magnetic resonance imaging, where I put religious individuals into a brain scanner, had them perform spiritual and religious tasks such as reading scripture, and then report to us when they were having a spiritual or religious experience. In this particular study, I was able to enroll Latter-day Saints, also known as Mormons. And as they were reading the Book of Mormon, which is a sacred book of scripture to them, they literally pushed a button when they had a peak religious experience that they referred to as feeling the spirit. And we observed that there was increased activity, specifically in the nucleus accumbens, an area of the brain that's associated with reward responses, when these individuals claim to be feeling the spirit. I go more deeply into the details of this experiment in my TEDx talk titled "This is Your Brain on God," which you're welcome to check out on YouTube. But one of the big picture take-home messages is that people are reliable self-reporters of their internal spiritual experiences. More recently, I've used a different technique to map out various aspects of spirituality and religion, particularly using brain lesions. This work that was published in Biological Psychiatry identified a neural circuit for spirituality and religion using new onset increases in spirituality, as well as new onset decreases in spirituality. The construct of interest for this study is spiritual acceptance. Scientifically defined, spiritual acceptance indicates a worldview which includes forces that cannot be rationally comprehended or objectively proven. Its opposite is pure rational materialism, or in other words, the worldview wherein you only believe things that you can physically measure and quantify. Surprisingly to me, spirituality was most strongly associated with brain circuits defined by a brainstem region called the periaqueductal gray. And I'll get around in a minute here to why this is so juicy. Shifting gears, some of the wellness programming that I'm implementing at Harvard College is centered on a construct that we're calling earth compassion. And why earth compassion? Well, part of the reason is that it's been observed that things like compassion meditation and even maternal love also are associated with this same brain region, the periaqueductal gray, that we identified in our study of spiritual acceptance. This leads to a speculative hypothesis that if we can stimulate spirituality, compassion, and these feelings of love, that we might have a synergistic or an additive effect across the outcomes. A big picture concept here is one of utilitarian versus relational mindsets. A utilitarian mindset is one where you're thinking about, how can I use something? How can I utilize it? or even how can I exploit it? A relational mindset, by contrast, thinks about reciprocity. It thinks about interconnectedness. A study that was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, a high-impact scientific journal, demonstrated that brain lesions associated with violent crime, so things like rape and murder, were similar at the level of the brain to impersonal, utilitarian moral decision-making. Whereas personal, relational moral cognition had the opposite pattern in the brain relative to these signatures of violent crime. And that's so profound when we start to think about a utilitarian versus a relational view of the earth and of nature. Are individuals being utilitarian? And is that in some ways associated with violence even? Versus are individuals being relational? And is that associated with a more pro-social moral disposition? A big question for me then is, can spirituality help to facilitate a relational mindset? Once again, we've seen that different studies point to the same areas of the brain for spiritual acceptance, compassion, and maternal love. So we have reason to think that there could be an additive or a synergistic effect between spirituality and compassion and love. Work that I have in the pipeline right now is also looking at mystical type experiences. And it's directly indicating that mystical type experiences are negatively associated with these brain patterns for criminal behavior. It further leads us to suspect that a mystical type experience in the context of nature connectedness might reduce these dispositions for violent criminal behavior. And again, that's so profound, and it's just so provocative when we think in terms of ways in which a mystical connection with nature might actually reduce a violent or even a criminal type disposition relative to the earth and to nature. On the Earth Compassion Retreat that we rolled out at Harvard College, we integrated Indigenous knowledge sharing, meditative practices, as well as Abrahamic themed discussions around Earth responsibility and stewardship, all in the context of nature immersion. We also had a whole lot of fun. So making friendship bracelets, even having a dance party, and sharing delicious meals with each other. Once again, this was all in a nature immersive context to really have an experiential connection with natural systems and ecological settings. We had a scholar come in who is a dually trained developmental psychologist, as well as being a knowledge holder in her Anishinaabe Ojibwe tribe, and had a facilitator for meditative sound practices in order to facilitate those mystical type experiences in the retreat participants. We as well had a panel of scholars representing Jewish, Christian, and Islamic perspectives on nature relationality and earth stewardship. And I'm so happy to say that all of these aspects of the retreat were so well received by our students. There was such a positive response to them. One of our students after the retreat said, earth compassion means energy and love. It means exploration of yourself and how you interact with the earth. Not only why, but how. It means understanding that you came from the earth, and that for there to have been life, Mother Earth had to love first. This is one of the most beautiful things I learned at the retreat, that life comes from love. Everything starts with love. I believe that something that is good for one thing is good for all others, because we are not separate from the environment or anything else. So helping yourself, helping someone else, helping the earth, all improvement goes toward the improvement of the bigger togetherness. And these are exactly the types of outcomes that we're hoping to observe from this type of earth compassion programming. As you can see, by the end of the retreat, there was just so much pro-social, positive connection that was flowing through the retreat participants. And it made us really optimistic that the more that we refine through evidence-based empirical studies of these different aspects of spirituality, compassion, nature connectedness, the more that we might be able to optimize the way that these different interventions all reinforce one another. Thank you so much for letting me share some of our exciting work in progress with you. And I'm thrilled that you're interested in this type of content.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm David Derezotes, and I'm Professor Emeritus, which is a fancy way of saying that I retired from the College of Social Work at the University of Utah about a year ago. The last 18 months, I've been writing a textbook. That's what I've done in academia as for my writing requirement. And this textbook is called Climate Change in Individual, Community, and Planet. And so it's something I've been thinking about, and it's a pleasure to have an opportunity to talk about this with you in your conference. And my short little 10-minute presentation will especially be focused on the interconnection every one of us, I believe, has, not only with our own body, mind, spirit, but with other people on the planet, other living things, and the ecosystems that preserve all life on the planet. So I have a slide show for you, and there's going to be just a few slides here. And that theme of interconnectedness, which we'll also call bilateral relationship, will be something we'll discuss and touch on in each one of the slides. As you can see in the first slide, we're talking about individual and collective human well-being. When I describe the climate crisis to you today in this brief presentation, we're talking about not just global warming, but also pollution and species extinction, because the three are interrelated in their causes and effects. And there's a wealth of information out there. And I can tell you over the 18 months I've been exploring this in depth, there's so many indicators that are, in my mind, indisputable now, that not only does what we call the climate crisis impact my well-being as an individual human being on all the different levels, physical and psychological, including not only that, but also that my response to the climate crisis, which we'll touch on today, also impacts my well-being as well as the well-being of other people, other living things, and the ecosystems. So if you're wondering what I'm talking about, I'll try to explain that in the next couple slides. Maybe there's three areas we could say we need a climate change in order to address the climate crisis. And the first one we could talk about briefly is human consciousness. So what's that? My favorite definition is reverent awareness, our ability to see things the way they are, including ourselves and the world around us, with some kind of acceptance. What good is seeing the way things are if I don't accept them? That doesn't mean I have to like them, right? And what is the villain that keeps me from seeing things the way they are and accepting them? Well, from one perspective, we could call that the ego, which is actually something that evolved in all human beings. And there's a lot of evidence that makes us think that it probably evolved to help us survive and to function in groups and communities. Ego can be defined as my tendency to identify with the beliefs I have. So not only do I have a belief, but that belief is me and I am that belief. You know, and when I identify with the belief, then I will protect it. And if you criticize my belief, then I feel you're criticizing me, which we can link to some of the polarization that we see in conversations about the climate crisis that we'll touch on briefly today. Ego, from the best read that I can make of the literature, is connected more with left hemispheric functioning than right. And there's a lot of neuroscience there that we don't have time to go into, but there's a lot of evidence that suggests that. When I have an ego that I have not examined, and so therefore functions unconsciously, it's more likely that it will be associated with the following feelings: a feeling of separation from the world I'm in, from other people, and from other living things and ecosystems, which is probably directly linked to our climate crisis. Because when I feel separate from other living things and from the world, I'm less likely to care for and care about those things. A feeling of impotence, which here means that I am inadequate to do anything about the climate crisis. And a feeling of moral superiority, or we could call it grandiosity, which refers to this idea that my beliefs about the climate crisis, and especially my moral beliefs, are superior to other people's. Therefore, I don't have to listen to any other people's views. And if that sounds familiar when you turn on the news today, it's because it is familiar, because we're used to polarization in our conversations. Um, this all suggests, of course, further that there is an interconnection, that bilateral relationship between ourselves and the world. We need a climate change, secondly, in our local and global communities. Climate change in communities occurs through human relationships, another example of interconnectedness. That's what I believe, and I think there's evidence for it. And in addition to the use of consciousness that we talked about in the last slide, to sort of temper the ego, we can use what we call dialogue to create those kinds of relationships we need. The purpose of dialogue is to bridge the differences that currently divide us. And in this case, the differences in opinion about the climate crisis. Does it exist? Can it be addressed? We could say that without civility, there is no civilization, and that dialogue emphasizes how we communicate with each other, as opposed to debate, which you'll find in practically every high school in the country. But as long as I've been studying this, I've found hardly any high schools in the country that have a dialogue team, which I think is what we need today to help young people, as well as people who are older, to have conversations that are civil so we can find cooperation. Because without cooperation, how can we address the climate crisis? So again, there's this bilateral relationship between the way we relate to, as individuals, as communities, with other people who we may perceive as different, and therefore makes it difficult for us to cooperate with them. A third area of a climate change that we need, we discuss local and global communities, is to maybe shift the way we approach um, uh, our attitude about whether change is possible or not. One of my favorite quotes is from Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who wrote, "My friends, do not lose heart. We were made for these times." We live in an era, don't we, where many of us have lost heart, or losing heart, which is a belief that change can happen, and that our future generations will have a planet to live on. Um, uh, One of the things that I've been working on is developing an idea of faith-based activism, which is hope plus an active state of consciousness where I make a difference. Without activism, hope is merely a desire for a future change that may never occur, mainly often because the time that I live in now is so difficult. So faith-based activism combines hopeful attitude with a commitment to take action, and is based on both hope and empowerment. Um, uh, when there's evidence that when we take a faith-based activism approach, it enhances our physical and psychological well-being. Another indicator of this interconnection we have with everything. Finally, a slide on the radical middle. It's one of my favorite terms, and the idea is that we're trying to heal polarization by finding a middle ground. And we could say polarization involves not just exaggerated self-interest, and not just the exaggeration of differences between us as human beings, but also a lack of civility about how we address those differences. So the radical middle, we could say, is a relational place between two sides of any polarization. In this case, does climate crisis exists and what we should do about it, that we could find through civil dialogue. And there's evidence that when people co-create a middle ground and find commonalities, just differences, and treat each other civilly, that also enhances individual and community well-being. So I hope this brief introduction is interesting to you. Maybe at some point you might look at some of these materials more deeply, and it was a pleasure talking.
Hello, my name is Jon Erickson. I'm a professor in the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources at the University of Vermont, and also a fellow at the Gund Institute for Environment. I'm going to talk today about some work we're doing on planetary health from the ground up, co-creating a well-being economy in Vermont. So first, some of the context. It has become well established that the Earth system, driven by human domination, is beyond what are sometimes referred to as planetary boundaries. This is the third assessment by the Stockholm Resilience Center in Sweden that is trying to put some numbers on whether we are within or beyond boundaries, for example, on climate change, biosphere integrity, land system change. And the picture is not so good. The co-author of the recent report, Johan Rockström, says we don't know how long we can keep transgressing these key boundaries before combined pressures lead to irreversible change and harm. At the same time as we're trying to sort of stay within what the planet can support for the human subsystem, we're also trying to reach goals, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals, that over 190 nations have agreed to this development platform, to create a world of no poverty, zero hunger, to create a world of decent work and economic growth, to create a world of gender equality, peace, and justice. All of this reaching of the Sustainable Development Goals, the social foundations of society, has to happen over the long term within the ecological ceiling of our planetary system. So what I'm talking about today is really combining these two goals, right? To meet Sustainable Development Goals, but within the boundaries of the planet's ecosystems. And to do this in a way that balances the needs between humans and other than humans' life, balances the needs between humans on planet Earth, but also between our generation and many generations to come. So some of this work has been done, for example, with my colleagues at Leeds University in the UK. And what this graphic shows you is a study that they produced called A Good Life for All Within Planetary Boundaries. And they asked this question. Each of these circles is a country in the world. The size of the circle is the size of their population. So the big circle in the lower left is India. The next big circle is China. The biggest circle in the top right is the US. The question they asked is, can these national societies, these national economies, stay within planetary boundaries and meet these Sustainable Development Goals? So you can see from the picture, this is moving in the wrong direction. Countries are moving past these biophysical boundaries. The top right are countries that have blown past 6 or 7 of the biophysical boundaries measured in this study. They are meeting social thresholds. So the top left, the y-axis, is how many of the social thresholds are achieved. But they're doing it in a way that pushes the system beyond the biophysical carrying capacity of the Earth systems or beyond the share of one particular population's economy of the Earth systems. The question they asked is, can we find a nation? Can we find strategies to get in the top left corner, right? How do we build societies from the ground up that meet all of the social foundations, for example, all of the Sustainable Development Goals, but do so within their share of planetary resources? So this context is the context of donut economics, and this is a framework that we've borrowed from the work of Oxford economist Kate Raworth. And she's asking this question: how do we get nation states? How do we get states within countries? How do we get communities within states within this safe and just space for humanity? How do we create a world where we're above social foundations, where we have equitable access to food, water, health, education, income, and work, political voice, social equity, gender equality, all those things reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals? But how do we do it in a way that stays within the ecological ceiling of climate change, ocean acidification, chemical pollution, freshwater withdrawal, land conversion, etc.? How do we meet Sustainable Development Goals, but within the boundaries of the planet? And so this is really the context of some of our work here in Vermont, is to work through in a way that includes multiple voices, multiple perspective, where we create targets for living well within our means, right? Targets for the social foundations, targets for our state's share of the ecological ceiling to live well within the means of the living planet. We have a lot of work to leverage. About 12 years ago, we passed Vermont Act 113, the Genuine Progress Indicator Act, which began us down this path of trying to understand the net contributions, benefits minus costs of economic activity on the well-being and long-term prosperity of our citizens. This work was meant to develop tools to identify public policy priorities, to get us, if you will, in the current vernacular, inside the donut. So this work has recently inspired a network of networks, if you will, a collection of Vermont NGOs and universities and people working towards a new definition, a new way of measuring and monitoring and bringing about prosperity for all, but within the means of a living planet. So the exercises we've been doing with various audiences around the state is this donut exercise, right? How do we define the social foundations of living well in Vermont, the inner circle, but within the means of both our own state's natural resources, but within our fair share of planetary boundaries? So this work looks like naming what the status of each of the wedges of the social and ecological is, calculating the trend, understanding if we're going up, down, or sideways, setting a goal and measuring how far we are away from that goal. So this is about an agenda building process, working in all of those spaces from food access to gender equality to climate action, trying to understand what the goals in each of those wedges of the donut are. So this work looks like meetings, right? Having big, broad meetings amongst communities and between sectors of the economy, between sectors within civil society to come together. So people who are working on the food piece or that human health piece or the water piece can start to realize there are root causes to their problems, that each of these wedges of the donut are interrelated with one another. Getting out our pens and paper and drawing the conditions for a good life within planetary boundaries, thinking through the strategies and the ways that the various agendas that the groups across our state of Vermont are connected to one another. We've done this also in the university setting, in classrooms. So this is the work of a graduate student of ours, Rigo Melgar, who took work in a large undergraduate class that went about measuring the status, trend, and goals of the various wedges that have been identified through participatory process of Vermont's donut. We've also used this framing to help us define and connect and build collaborative opportunities around planetary health at the University of Vermont, where I'm sitting today, to build a sort of more comprehensive notion of human well-being that is inextricably linked to the health of the environment. So similar to what we've done with our students, similar to what we've done with NGOs and community members, we've begun to bring together faculty, staff, and students, get out the donut and imagine who's working on the social foundations at the State University of Vermont, who's working on the ecological ceilings, and most importantly, how are they connected? How are they bridging for a more comprehensive view of planetary health? So this is the work of planetary health at UVM, also in the state of Vermont. It builds on this notion of redefining prosperity, measuring a sort of new way of thinking through our well-being in Vermont, and most importantly, making these kinds of connections in areas that have been traditionally siloed from one another, the social and the ecological, to come up with a renewed, more comprehensive, more systems view of human health and well-being. So that's one example of planetary health from the ground up, co-creating this new well-being economy in Vermont, work that we're doing that we think is very relevant to the Osher Collaborative for Integrative Health and this idea of health, people, and planet. Thank you very much.